This is Charles Mangan, and I am recording my MacAdmins 2025 session all about electricity. I ran out of time during my presentation slot, unfortunately, so I'm making this video for anyone who is interested in seeing the full unabridged contents. Please do enjoy. I originally decided to reverse things up a little bit and do a Q&A at the beginning of the session. Seeing as this is a recorded version, the only questions that are available are my own, and you don't want to hear those. So when we talk about electricity or power or a charge or whatever, we need to be sure which form of electricity we're talking about. In our comfy corner of the electromagnetic spectrum, electric current comes in generally two flavors, that is country and western. Kidding. These are the jokes, people. So it is either AC or DC. So that's alternating current or direct current. We talk about electric current like water flowing downstream in a gentle, meandering brook, or perhaps a vicious undertow that silently snatches you from the peaceful shallows near a beach and dumps your lifeless, bloated corpse miles from shore as a meal for the fishes and a testament to the frailty of human life when faced with the awesome power of the deep blue sea. So anyway, AC, DC, those about to rock, we salute you. Alternating current, AC, travels further along conductors and wires without losing its capacity, more so than direct current, or at least that was the idea when people were first building electrical power grids in the 19th century. As so, all of the wall plugs in your house or office, which carry mains or house or comes out of the wall power, are all AC, the alternating current. And it's called that because while it seems to flow from the wall into, say, the lights, the direction the charge goes in actually alternates. If you had some kind of fantastical device to measure it, call it a scope of oscillating or something like that, and drew a graph over time, you would see the voltage in your AC outlet swings from 170 volts down through 0 to minus 170 volts and back again. You can think of this as like the tide coming in and out, like the sea, the harsh, briny mistress, the sea. Electrons flowing one way in the wire are positive volts, then they flow back the other way as negative voltage. You can think of it that way, and you're welcome to. It's a good enough explanation for high school physics, and unless you can understand the actual quantum physics level that actually does describe it, we'll leave it at that. When electrons flow, they can do work, and it doesn't matter which way they're going as long as they're moving. Again, for the physics people, I get that they don't actually move, so don't at me. To get the total voltage, we add it up from peak to peak. 170 plus 170 makes the total 120. Because of calculus, measuring the derivative of the sine wave, seriously, the area under the curve and all that, remember? It works out that AC voltage in this country, that is the US, is 120 volts. That is if it is a perfect sine wave, which it never is because of the harsh realities of harsh reality. It might start out that way at the generator end, but where it hits the wall plug, it'll be jumping up a bit, or down, drop out a bit here and there. On the average, the sine wave is the general goal. In the US, the frequency of that wave from peak to peak is 60 hertz, or 60 cycles per second. Other places, it's 50. Generally, it's one or the other. But that's part of the reason why things like NTSC and PAL versions of television couldn't coexist. It would be sort of like metric and imperial for electricity. At a standard US AC outlet, you'll get a ground wire, a neutral wire, and a hot wire, and that's where you could measure that sine wave carrying the 120 volts AC. Coming into your circuit breaker, though, you'll probably have 3 hot supply wires, and their waves are each slightly offset from the others. Those 3 phases add up. 120 plus 120 plus 120 equals 240 through constructive and destructive interference of the waves and blah, blah, blah. Yes, there will be math, so please be prepared. From the circuit breaker, the different parts of the house or building often each get a different phase, literally splitting the 3 transmission wires in the box off to different parts of the building. On the other hand, in a server room or in the outlet that you plug your dryer into, you'll get 240 volt outlets with all 3 of the wires jammed in there. And 240 volt outlets, because they are dangerous to appliances that are not built for 240 volts, are usually clearly marked and often have a different style plug than the normal outlet plug in your region, whether it's US or elsewhere in the world. One of the prongs will be a special shape so that you can't plug one kind of plug into the other. So AC may be best for transmission, historically, asterisk, and it can be efficiently distributed in multiple phases at once, but along with the math, it's much more complicated to build circuits or complex devices around AC. There are plenty of simple devices that operate just fine on alternating current. A basic lamp doesn't require any conversion from AC to DC, or things like toasters or other sort of 19th century level technology that in general converts electricity in whatever form into heat and light. Even building something as relatively simple as an AC-powered electric motor to do things like drive factory conveyor belts had famous scientists and big brains like Thomas Edison stumped. And then, once you start building complex things with integrated circuits and transistors, or trying to miniaturize them and operating them on lower voltages, then DC is definitely the king. There is such a thing as negative DC volts, but by and large, again, hand wavy, nothing to see here. The DC direct current that you deal with is either a steady positive voltage or off. And you have one wire that carries the charge, in this instance 12 volts, and another that leads to ground. So on or off, on or off. I'll get around to the ground in just a second. If you want to dim an LED, for instance, or run a motor at a variable speed, you might think, well, you just lowered the voltage, but most things designed for DC will only run well, or at all, at a single voltage. So instead, you turn it on and off really fast, faster than you can generally see the blinking. You spend more time with the voltage off, and the light looks dimmer, or the motor slows down. Most things that you interact with can dim or change speed. They usually work this way. And if you are taking notes, which I expect that you are, that is called pulse width modulation. Again, there may be a quiz later. And as you can probably see why this graph, or this kind of graph, is called a square wave as opposed to the sine wave from the AC graph. We'll stick a pin in that for later. To recap, AC is in the power lines and the outlets in the wall. Things that plug into the wall outlet might have either 2 or 3 prongs. The type of connector a device requires generally depends on the risk that it holds of electrocuting you if there is a fault inside it. Again, see the frailty and hubris of the human condition. Generally, only appliances with a metal housing or some other conductive part that the user might interact with require that third prong. That third ground nubbin is usually connected somehow to the metal shell, so that if one of the other 2 wires, the hot and neutral, remember, accidentally comes in contact with that conductive metal shell, casing, what have you, whether it's through water damage or some other physical damage, the electricity in the wire goes straight to ground instead of through you, stopping your heart or generally causing injury and other havoc. So that's why it's important to update any outlets you may come across in older buildings that you're working in that are the old type sockets with only 2 holes. And never use any kind of workaround for plugging in what should be a grounded appliance to one of the non-grounded outlets that looks like this. And when I say to ground, it literally means into the ground. So if you were to follow that 3rd wire from the outlet through the breaker box or electrical panel in your house, you would eventually come to a thick wire, usually copper, that goes into the ground, into the dirt, the earth. Supposedly, you can ground a reasonable amount of current just by sticking a wire into a bucket of dirt. I don't recommend trying it, but it is worth experimenting if you have medics on standby. But that's pretty much how grounding things works. The extra electrons, asterisk, end up going into the dirt, into the earth, and dissipating into the mass that we are all standing on and circling the sun. Newer AC sockets will have that 3rd connector and might look like any of these other ones, depending on where and when the building was wired up during construction. And the voltage in those outlets may be 120, 220, 127, 230, 240, 250. The frequency of the phases, usually either 50 hertz or 60. And there may be either one or all 3 phases. It's an international conundrum, almost as bad as time zones. But just remember this, 3 prongs good, and that 3rd prong goes into the earth. Everything else generally runs on DC, which has too many different port sizes and shapes and standards to show or list. So to represent that, I will just go with a generic USB plug of unknown quality. So because nearly everything else runs on DC, we end up spending a considerable amount of time and wasted energy, literally energy wasted as heat, converting between AC and DC. And I know I threw a lot out there to remember. There's calculus, lots of numbers, the fragile human condition, but this is all you should need to remember about AC and DC. To recap, AC comes out of the wall, is complicated, and requires lots of big numbers. DC is much smaller numbers, simpler to understand in Grok, and everything is more complicated. Everything that is more complicated than a toaster that doesn't run on batteries inevitably converts AC to DC. Hopefully that was clear. Now I talk a lot about voltage before, and we'll get to that, and sort of just left it as a thing that you measure in numbers. Bigger numbers is more volts, right? So it's time to define some of those terms. 2 main terms that we'll use specifically, amps and volts. And you may be saying to yourself, well, I know what an amp is, but what the heck is a volt? For reference, the voltage of a typical AA or AAA battery is nominally 1.5 volts. Then, of course, a 9-volt battery is, you guessed it, 9 volts. The battery that is used to start most cars, this big honkin' thing that can weigh 40 pounds or more, full of lead and corrosive acid, that is 12 volts. That big guy there will indeed burn your skin, cause serious injury if you touch both poles at once with something metal and let the electricity arc between it and you. It also makes fun popping noises and smells like someone is cooking pork chops. Don't ask me how I know this. The middle one will just about make your tongue tingle if you lick it. So what's going on here? What do these voltage numbers mean? If that big chungus is only making 3 or more than the one on my TV remote. Allow me to explain. You may think of a fully charged battery that's chock full of electrons like a bucket of water. Asterisk again, a full battery isn't actually full of electrons in the sense that you use up the battery's capacity and it loses that corresponding number of electrons and it is eventually empty. That's not really how it works at a physics level, but again, for our purposes, just roll with it. Double asterisk, electricity also doesn't act much like water, and the whole analogy will eventually break down, but that doesn't happen for another 30 slides or so. As I said, just roll with it. The bucket, our battery, our power source, unfortunately has a hole in it. Gravity is now making the water flow down, eventually splashing uselessly on the ground. Because of gravity, the water will always seek the ground. Before it gets to the ground, we can use the falling water to do some kind of work, like spin a wheel or lift some kind of load. If we're talking about electricity at this point, not water, that load might make a light come on or spin a motor, but for the moment, just think of it as water turning a water wheel. The amount of work the falling water can do is based on how much water is going over the wheel and how quickly. A small hole in the bucket with very little pressure behind it will spin the wheel slowly, if at all. But if we make the hole bigger, more water will be hitting the wheel. That means we can turn a bigger wheel, though it won't go much faster than the small wheel did, because there's nothing really pushing the water but its own weight. Another way to get the wheel to do more work would be to add some kind of pressure behind the water, maybe in a taller bucket, making the water a column of water, or just use a plunger pushing the water through the hole. Whatever fits into your mental model of how water in buckets works, just add pressure. And it becomes a small jet of water, as opposed to a gentle stream. Now it's moving quickly and it can do more work, spin the wheel a little faster. In keeping with that relatively simple and, again, wildly inaccurate mental model, think of the size of the hole in the bucket or the width of the resulting stream of water as voltage. The pressure, or whatever you imagine pushing the water out of the bucket, resulting in the stream moving faster, is amperage. So volts being width and amps being pressure. This might be backwards from what some of you may have learned in the past in similar how does electricity work sort of lessons, but looking at it this way was always more intuitive to me, and when you consider how to measure the work a certain setup can do, I hope this also makes sense to you. For that matter, you measure work in watts. So that is our third term, watts. Wattage, watts is work. And if you remember nothing else from this presentation, hopefully there will be some kind of quiz later on in life. I'm not sure if I can arrange it. Remember this: watts equals volts times amps. At any particular moment, the flow or volume of water in our imaginary stream is a function of the width of the stream, which is voltage, and its speed due to pressure, which would be its amperage. We combine those terms, watts being volts times amps, and that is the wattage. The volume and speed of the water will determine how much work it can do. Over time, that accumulates. We measure the actual energy that was spent or consumed in work over time as watts/hours, or watt hours, or milliwatt hours, or kilowatt hours, depending on the order of magnitude and the scale. When it comes to batteries, you'll typically see them measured in amp hours or milliamp hours instead of watt hours, since devices that you're powering with those batteries are getting powered at a set specific voltage. That's one less variable you have to remember when you're considering the math of battery capacity. And so again, hey, one less math to do. That's great. So your typical AAA, again, might be 1,000 milliamp hours. AA is going to be 2,000 or 2,500 or so. So if 1,000 millisomethings is one something, that 1 amp hour AAA battery. On that note, you've probably seen viral posts about someone discovering that a 9-volt battery is in fact 6 AAA cells all wired together. Gasp. How high up does this conspiracy go? Does the Energizer Bunny know? Seriously, this garbage pops up on Reddit at least every couple of years. So yes, a 9-volt battery can be put together from 6 times 1.5-volt AAA batteries. So the math works out. It would have 6 times the capacity too, right? Weirdly, no. A typical 9-volt battery will only have a listed capacity of 500 to 600 milliamp hours. So that's less than 1,000. And how does that do math? The amps part of amp hours are expressed as, or assumed to be, in a particular nominal voltage. So as your 1.5 volt battery gets drained, that voltage will drop below the nominal 1.5, and that's when they stop measuring it as useful capacity. So the AAA is 1 amp hour at 1.5 volts, which watts being volts times amps. I'm going to say this multiple times so that it eventually sticks. 1.5 watt hours. If you measure the voltage coming off a dead AAA, it will show 1 volt for a long time. That is, the trouble is, though, that 1 volt isn't going to power anything designed to run on 1.5 volts, so it may as well be 0. You can stack multiple dead batteries together to get something that actually powers your garage door opener or remote control in a pinch, but the actual capacity of any individual cell drops off pretty rapidly once it stops making that nominal voltage. They're designed that way so that there's not much wasted chemistry in the process, or at least not more than is necessary. So 600 milliamp hours, that's 0.6 amp hours, where amps is at 9 volts, comes to 5.4 watt hours. That math still doesn't do math, right? But yeah, it does. 9-volt cells are not just made from 6 AAA cells, but usually a solid block of chemicals or a stack of individual cells that fill into that blocky 9-volt shape. The ones that are made from 6 AAA size cells probably get made from the least expensive ones and have a bunch of space in between them that could be filled with more chemicals and thus more capacity. And even with that, there are losses due to heat as the mass increases with the cube of the scalar, and the surface area increases only with the square, and wiring them in series to make the 9-volt nominal spec is, and now I'm just making shit up, sorry. But anyway, you can make a much higher capacity 9-volt battery pack with 6 AA's or 6 D cells. Those also still only have 1.5 volts, but they are a much higher capacity in amp hours. The standard 9-volt we have is really just a convenient form factor that stuck around. It's not intended to be a replacement for 6 AA's or 6 AA's. As for the car battery, capacity of those varies pretty wildly, mainly because there's so many different formulations and physical sizes, but a typical range in a car battery is anywhere from 45 to 75 amp hours. So let's just say 60-ish average, and that is at 12 volts. It usually only takes a few amps of oomph at 12 volts to get a few seconds to get your car started, but the rest of that capacity is there for running the lights, the radio, the fans, the annoying passenger door is open, ding, 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 all while the engine is still off and you're waiting for your kids to get in the dang car. We're already running late. Here we have a typical lithium polymer battery cell for an iPhone, or a battery pack, or any number of portable battery-powered devices. Looking closely, it says it is 3,450 milliamp hours capacity. Most lithium-ion cells, for reasons beyond my high school level chemistry, are rated somewhere between 3.7 to 3.9 volts, regardless of the size. This one says 3.8. And they did the math for us, the rated capacity of 13.11 watt hours. Watts is work, but for sticklers, aka scientists, energy is usually measured in joules or Newton meters. A joule, also equivalent to 1 watt second, means that 3,600 seconds in an hour, so 3,600 joules in a watt hour. This battery, therefore, contains 47,196 joules of electrical energy trapped inside it as chemical energy. To put that number into perspective, an original M80, small explosives that were designed to simulate artillery fire for military training, ones with 80 grains or 5.2 grams of flash powder. Flash powder has, according to Wikipedia, 11,000 joules per gram, so that comes out to just over 57,000 joules of energy for the old-style M80. The civilian, air quotes, M80, has only 3 grams or 33,000 joules of energy. Those are still, however, controlled by the U.S. Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, as purchasing ground explosives with over 50 milligrams capacity requires a license in the United States. Even these fake M80s in fireworks stands that have 50 milligrams of powder will take off a finger or cause hearing loss and blindness. None of these, by the way, actually have the power of a quarter stick of dynamite, as you might have read, which is roughly 1 megajoule or a million joules. Luckily, there's all kinds of safety features engineered into the battery, the charger, the devices, the packaging, so that all of that energy stays as chemical energy, otherwise goes into 8 hours of doom scrolling and not, actual doom. Like being released all at once over the course of a few seconds in a brilliant, if toxic, pyrotechnics display. And that is some math that may be more fun in the abstract than when it literally blows up in your face. When lithium batteries begin to break down chemically, they start to release gases inside their packaging as part of the otherwise normally balanced chemical reaction suddenly becoming unbalanced. Those leftover bits at the end or beginning of the chemical process are gases that have nowhere to go. And that creates the telltale spicy pillow effect of an inflating lithium battery. Therefore, we're all walking around with, yes, computers in our pockets, sure. More computer than existed in the world at the time of the moon landings, and probably for a decade or so after. But we're also walking around with little potential bombs in our pockets, in our backpacks, and in our carry-on luggage. So the gases inside one of these inflated batteries mean that it's no party balloon. Gases like carbon monoxide, which is not great for anybody inhaling it, that is, of course, the least of your concerns. There's also hydrogen gas, yes, like the hydrogen that was in the Hindenburg, also a large spicy pillow, and it gets better. There's also a fun mix of saturated and unsaturated hydrocarbons that are all either flammable or outright explosive. Things like butane, ethane, methane, propane, and a handful that I don't know how to pronounce. So yes. And those don't even need a spark to ignite. Simply piercing the skin of the inflated battery will often cause enough of a chemical reaction, and the heat will ignite the contents of that party balloon. So this is why I will leave you with this public service announcement about batteries. And please pardon my language, but we don't fuck with spicy pillows. Just don't do it. Leave it to professionals. So that's a little bit about measuring wattage in context of capacity for things like batteries. In measuring battery capacity, it's like that charge is just sitting there waiting to be used, which makes sense. How do these volts and amps numbers work out when you're measuring electrons moving from place to place? Which means it's time for America's new favorite game show, Will It Charge? I have here a pretty typical accessory device, black and gray blob with some ports on the back and blinky lights. I see coax, network, and a round barrel jack for power. I know that the first two should do, but the barrel jack could be pretty much anything from this angle. I picked this particular blobbin because, again, it had a nice, clean, legible label on it. And this is the important part for the talk. The fact that they spelled the acronym for media access control like that kind of tweaks me every time, but I'll save that for the pedantic networking session next year. This says, to power the device, it needs 5 volts direct current, and it would really like 1 amp, please. Before we get further, please notice the 3 little circles. So zoom and enhance. This little icon should be somewhere on any device with a small round barrel jack power connector. A matching icon will also be on the adapter itself. It tells you the outer metal sleeve of the connector, and the corresponding outer part of the little hole in the device is the negative or ground part of that DC connection. The inner part of the connector and the matching pin in the middle part of the port are for the positive part of the connector. This is the polarity of just about anything that's made in the last 30 years or so, and anything that follows one of the several standards for these types of things. Insert the obligatory XKCD standards reference here. I did say just about everything because there are some weird, proprietary, non-standard, or pre-standard plugs that have the same barrel-style jack or coaxial connector that are inverted polarity. That's where the positive voltage is in the outer shell, and connecting the two might do nothing. It might cause a spark and some embarrassment, or it might cause a fire and for you to re-examine your life choices. It is rare that you would ever come across something that poorly designed. Oh hey, let's make the exposed metal bit the part that can get wet, corroded, and grabbed by tiny human fingers, the part that carries the ouchy part of the electricity. That makes perfect sense. But knowing to look for this has actually saved me from exploding some vintage equipment in the past, so I'm simply paying that tip forward. So, according to the label, 5 volts. Easy. And so the power supply needs to match that voltage. Recall the width of the water stream in our bucket model. That was the voltage. Upgrading the bucket model slightly, and now the water is traveling through pipes instead of splashing through the air. A 5-volt pipe fits nicely with another 5-volt pipe. The 3-volt width is going to be close but too loose, and there will probably be some water getting where it's supposed to go, but not enough, and it won't be able to do any useful work. So maybe overcompensate and try a bigger 9-volt connection. And, well, let's just say things will get really messy then. So remember, volts is volts, math is math. If it helps you to remember always matching voltages, remember your batteries. The garage door remote takes a 9-volt battery. No matter how you try, and if you don't have a 9-volt, it won't be able to jam some AAAs in there in a pinch. A round plug into a square hole, literally. Or a slightly rectangular, not quite square. You get the idea. You don't mix up voltages. So the power supply needs to match that voltage, 5 volts. Let's look what power supplies we have in our bin of random electronics. Oh hey, how convenient. I actually had the power adapter that came with that HD home run goober, so I know it'll work. But in case there's any questions, 5 volts, check. Polarity, a little small to see clearly, but it also checks out. Not that I was too worried since this was clearly made sometime during the current millennium. But now let's look at the amps. The goober says it wants 1 amp at 5 volts, and this matches it exactly, which is great because it is the adapter that it came with. But what if I didn't have that adapter anymore? Honestly, finding the two together in my kit of bins of parts and spaghetti full of wires, that was kind of a fluke. Normally, I go digging in the bin for all the orphan adapters and pull out kind of random ones until I find one that fits, like this. The plug end of this adapter is the same physical size as the 5-volt one from the HD Home Run, and it's got a longer cable so it reaches the other outlet where I wanted to plug it in. They're the same size plug, so they're compatible, right? That's a no. Switching the world over to use USB for charging as a physical interface has made finding a plug or a cable for any random junk drawer gizmo a lot easier. It did only take a couple of decades to work through all the variations of USB Type B and mini USB, micro USB, and now USB Type-C, with the occasional blind alley of things like Lightning thrown into the mix. And it's possible that next month the USB consortium will throw us all under the bus again and adopt another, even more confusing physical interface with a Byzantine naming scheme to match. But for the moment, if it's got a USB-C port, the devices on both ends have to be smart enough to at least negotiate. Doesn't mean they're always smart enough to come to the right answer, but they're at least supposed to not allow one another to catch fire. And if the manufacturer cheat and use a USB-C port, but it only has the wires for the bare minimum number of pins to provide charging, it's still a safe, if slow, least common denominator that even a fancy Qualcomm what's-it will default to. Random juncture flotsam like this Shenzhen Shanmusen Power Source Company Ltd AC-DC adapter, though, that's just got a coax barrel jack. It's 4 millimeters in diameter, and this other thing has a port the same size, so you have to ask yourself, will it charge? So, this first one is easy. The output is 5 volts, 1 amp. The input is the same. What do we think? Yes, of course it will work. Amps and volts match. Next up, the output is still 1 amp, but it's at 9 volts. And that's going to be deadly. Not necessarily for you, but probably for something inside that device. It's not going to work after that. Now for the bonus round, one of these will charge the device, one won't. Both are 5 volts, but one is only at half an amp, the other is 2 amps. So will it charge? Place your bets now. And does that surprise you? That the half amp charger will not successfully charge our 1 amp device, whereas the 2 amp charger will. And that is because amps suck. Which is to say, a device will demand so many amps. It will suck that much juice from whatever juice box is providing it. And this is where my bucket analogy finally breaks down, maybe a few slides earlier than promised, because a plunger in a bucket is okay for describing a static setup, giving you an idea of what the terms and measurements mean, but when you're connecting a real thing to power, it's not just an empty vessel waiting to be filled. It's got demands. The spice must flow. And when there's low demand, it's no problem. Up to the limit of what the charger is designed and rated for, still no problems. But once the device pulls or draws or sucks more amps, then things get hairy. Is this making anyone else thirsty? So consider yourself the device in question. You're recharging with your beverage of choice. The standard 6 millimeter diameter, 200 millimeter length drinking straw is provided and is designed to accommodate most liquid refreshment options. All is well. Then you switch it up. You get a milkshake. To get that creamy, icy, smooth dairy goodness through a soda straw, you have to work harder. The same straw means more work, and that's more watts at the same voltage. So mathity math means more amps. You're drawing more amps than the straw was designed for. You need a bigger straw or else it's going to collapse from the pressure. And I don't know about you, but I hate it when that happens. So remember, watts means work, and work means heat. If you've ever grabbed an adapter after charging your phone or your laptop and it was hot, not just warm to the touch, but hot, that means it was working maybe a little more than it was designed for. Luckily, there's always an engineering margin built in, but it's never good to push your luck. Heat will eventually kill every electronic component, either directly or through physical wear from expanding and contracting. This is even more true of the chemistry in batteries. More on that later, probably. The too small drinking straw represents whatever component inside the charger with some wire or chip that wasn't up to the task of carrying the load, the amps that you put on it. Work means heat, and if that was a thin piece of wire, that wire would have literally melted, or maybe just got hot enough to melt through its insulation, which is in danger of connecting two pieces of conductor that weren't meant to be connected. and that causes a short or a short circuit. And that's when volts go where they're not wanted. Like when you unexpectedly suck up one of the little tapioca spheres in your boba tea through the straw and it lodges itself in the back of your throat and you're sitting in the cafe suddenly coughing your lungs out and everyone's looking at you like, "Mommy, is that man gonna die?" Anyhow, the whole wire melting thing is precisely how a fuse works. A little length of thin wire sitting in a glass tube, a lot like a light bulb, actually. All the power goes through that filament, and it's the thinnest conductor in the whole circuit. If the load spikes above what that wire's capacity is, the wire will melt and the power disconnects. And as a disposable 5-cent fuse, it has saved you from having to throw out a $50 integrated circuit. Or it would if adding fuses didn't also add a few cents to the cost of building something, whereas making customers buy a new something because they plugged the wrong power adapter into their old something means that the company sells twice as many somethings. I hope I don't sound bitter. And I kind of wish I had a better segue here, but the math in this presentation will only get you so far. And of course, knowing is half the battle, but you do need some tools for the other half. And I don't expect anyone watching this to need to fully gear up overnight or jump headfirst into electrical engineering just based on this presentation, but if you ever have to diagnose hardware or even just test a battery, there's a few things that will make life that much easier, starting with a multimeter. This is a multimeter. There are many like it. This one is mine. This one is also mine, as is this one, and this one is my favorite. I might have a problem, but a really simple meter, not necessarily an old vintage one like this, but a simple one that you can get at a hardware store, will tell you if the AAA batteries that you're replacing in the presentation remote were really the reason it stopped working, or give you the confidence boosting beep to let you know, yeah, that metal chassis of that thing is properly grounded. They're really easy to use, and they also look really impressive when you pull one out of your bag when you go on site. And now this is some of the stuff that I just wanted to show off. This is an adjustable bench power supply. This one happens to be super old, and I think it's neat because it's got a built-in breadboard for prototyping or testing chips and components and circuits. Plus, it's made out of steel, so you could use it to take down a home invader if you clock him in the head, and for a bonus, give him tetanus if he survives. This is the same thing, newer and smaller, a bench power supply, also less of a fire hazard and a little bit more boring. I use this to power something up that either I don't have the correct batteries for, or I'm not sure what adapter it takes. It outputs a steady DC voltage through alligator clips or whatever else I can clip into those terminals. A knob adjusts to set standard voltages, 3 volts, 5 volts, 6, 9, 12. It has positive and ground, a power switch, and that's it. It's basically a sturdier version of one of those multi-voltage wall adapters that you could get when you lost the adapter that came with your clock radio, or you used to be able to get from places like Radio Shack when Radio Shack was still a thing. You also don't need one of these. This is a logic probe, which is handy for testing if a signal or voltage is getting from point A to point B on a circuit board. You clip it to power and ground, poke the probe around on various contacts, and it will light up or beep, depending on if that contact is live, so a high beep, or ground, a low beep, or if it oscillates between the two, and you can hear the difference in the tone between the random noise and a steady stream of ones and zeros. It's pretty neat, but you also don't need one. This is a logic analyzer, which is pretty much the same thing as the logic probe, but instead of one probe and beeps, it has 8 probes, lots of little blinky LEDs, and actually drives a virtual oscilloscope app on my Mac via USB. And this one has 16 probes and a whole suite of apps. And okay, yes, I see, and now I have a problem. You really don't need one of these. But this, on the other hand, is an actually useful tool for anyone that does IT support to have in their kit, if you don't already. It is a USB multimeter, essentially. Called various things online. This one is called a USB safety tester. This one happens to be an older model, so it's only got USB-A ports, but it still works with USB-C with adapters on either end. I won't go through a whole tutorial on how to use these doodads, but it's pretty simple. There's a couple of modes of operation. This mode that I'm showing now shows the port it's plugged into is providing right about 5 volts, and since there's nothing plugged in, there's no amps being drawn. There is a hole in the bucket the correct size, but nothing pushing or pulling the water out. In this image, I plugged a USB-powered LED desk lamp in, and you can see it's still pushing 5 volts, and that will fluctuate a little bit. A little bit over or under is fine, by the way, like 10%, so maybe even half a volt is normal, I think. But now the lamp is pulling half an amp, and that's as bright as the lamp goes. So now I know it's only about 2.5 watts to run it if I wanted to add that up with the output from other things that I'm using at the same time, which it's not bad for lighting my office, 2.5 watts. The other numbers on the right are counters that increment over time, so I can leave this little guy in place and see how many amp hours or watt hours a battery clocks in while I charge it up from empty. Is that battery pack supposed to hold 10 amp hours but stopping charging after 5? Might be time to return it. And it'll work the same in reverse. Is the power bank keeping the phone running as long as I expected it to? This is the same image, a little bit clearer, but from the manual, so it has pretty colors. So you can see, for instance, if an adapter or a laptop's USB port is delivering enough juice, or if the misbehavior. And this is a shot from the manual. It's a little bit clearer than the photograph, and also the new ones have pretty colors, so they're a little bit easier to read. So, for instance, if you were using something like this, you can see if an adapter or your laptop's USB port is delivering enough juice for the device that you are intending to plug into it, or maybe the misbehaving SD card reader is maybe it's not getting power because the cable that's plugged into it isn't transmitting, something along those lines. Helpful for troubleshooting and debugging hardware that way. Plus, you can see whether the questionable device that the meter is plugged into is actually within the USB spec, and that spec will include wiring resistors between a couple of the wires in pairs to limit the current that gets delivered, depending on that negotiation like I was talking about before. The value and location of the resistor, I believe, is one way that a device can detect from an otherwise dumb charger or other, cable within adapter within adapter with another cable, if it could attempt to do fast charging, or if this is a charging port and data, or vice versa, that sort of thing. And all of that is indicated by, as I said, the resistor value and locations, along with the actual data and voltage that it's transmitting on those data lines. Speaking of which, that second screen on the display shows the current on those data pins as well, so you'll see not just when the port is charging something or providing power, but when it's transferring data and in which direction. I, for one, always have to look it up to see if data plus means from the host to the device or if it's vice versa. But one thing that you should be able to tell right away is if you plug something into a charging only port and you're not expecting it to get any data off your phone, you start seeing that going back and forth, then that's definitely a finding. So here I've plugged in my phone to the adapter, and you see that the phone, even though it can do fast charging or smart charging or whatever generation of USB calls that protocol, the older USB hub that it's plugged into isn't really built for that. It's limited to 1.2 amps on that 5-volt port. And if you are interested in picking up one of these yourself, that QR code on the screen will take you to Amazon to buy one, or a dozen, or however many for you and all of your friends. I may have made that point to an affiliate link, so I'll get about 1/10 of a penny for each of you that buys one. Even if you buy maybe 1,000 of them and then return 900, I don't know exactly how that works, but I wouldn't try it, or maybe just for giggles. So this charger, speaking of fast charging, quick charging, whatever, is designed for Qualcomm Quick Charge USB 3.0 by Qualcomm registered trademark. Actually, it doesn't even say registered trademark, and that's sloppy. And looking at the pins on the port, you notice that the port is red. It's not actually part of the spec that it be red, but it is a signal that this one is a fast charging, or sorry, quick charging 3.0 by Qualcomm, etc. Looking at the pins sort of down the barrel this way, they look to be a little bit banged up. And that might be why I only found this charger at the bottom of that random devices drawer, and it's not actually in use, come to think of it. Which brings me to another question topic from the Slack, overpowered and underpowered adapters. And I will zoom in, enhance. Here we are. The second line there, the one starting with input, says that this device will take AC input of any voltage from 100 to 240 volts and at a frequency of 50 to 60 hertz, which means it's pretty much compatible anywhere in the world. The prongs will just need an adapter, not a voltage converter, as with some devices. Most new AC devices you'll see like this, they are this way, but not all of them, so always be sure to check anything that you're either bringing with you for international travel or before you plug it into, say, a server rack power supply to charge your phone. So sometimes those won't be compatible with the higher voltage. So check the label and use only as directed, etc. This also shows that when it's plugged into mains power, converting AC to DC will only require, at maximum, 0.35 amps. That, I expect, includes a wide safety margin since it could be at any input voltage, and that would be anywhere from the 100 volts to the 240 volts. And so it would probably only ever pull that 0.35 amps when it's getting the low end of the 100 volts input. Looking at the output line, it also provides in one tidy package 3 separate voltage outputs. Nicely done, Qualcomm. That's how all the newer fast USB charging standards work, by the way. To charge a rechargeable battery, regardless of what type, you generally push a voltage into it that's higher than its output voltage, essentially overwhelming the direction of the electricity flow, the current flow. To go faster, you add more voltage, obviously up to a point. More volts would mean more heat, of course, and heat kills batteries either slowly over time or very, very quickly, as in with fire. So generally it has to be managed intelligently. So a battery charger will have a lot of protection built into it, or at least a good one will have a lot of protection built into it to prevent overvoltage or overcharging, overheating, essentially, whatever kind of battery it is connected to, so as to prevent fires and explosion. But the real reason that I'm showing you this adapter, not because it was the quick USB blah blah 3.0, but honestly because it had the clearest markings of any of the adapters in my bin. I mean, look at it and weep, Johnny Ive. It's gold type on black, 10-point Helvetica, nicely kerned, unreasonably legible text for the adapter included with some inexpensive consumer device of unknown origin. Apple's adapters, on the other hand, I would say I could zoom and enhance, but I just can't see if my camera can even focus on the label on this. That's pretty much a nope. I even had to put something in line with the label that was high enough contrast for my phone's camera to focus on it, and I still can't read the text. I ran this through some basic Photoshop filters, and it's a little bit better. I can finally see what Apple markets as the 96-watt USB-C power adapter.
the only legible size type on the thing, which says 96W. That helps somewhat. It is still in light gray text on a white background. And here is the similarly chunky, but only slightly more so, otherwise anonymous white Apple brick, the 140 watt. 96 watts, 140 watts, we generally know what that means, sort of, but what voltage, really? And does it matter if it's USB-C? I mean, it should. If we flip them over, all the necessary information is there in delightful 3-point light gray text on a white background, which I'm sure is pushing the boundaries of strict compliance. And I hope someone is charging Apple some fine for every one of these they ship to cover the class action suit they will inevitably face for making their consumers go prematurely myopic. This, again, is the 96 watt and the various compliance markings on the 140 watt. This is the best I could do to make them both legible, the 96 on top, the 140 on bottom. If you squint and maybe adjust the contrast on your screen, you can see they both churn out 3 amps at 5 volts, which tops out the old, not the original, but at least an older USB charging spec, which is called current mode. The 140 watt will do 5 amps at 15 and 20 volts, and at 28 volts, which beats out the 96. The 9 and 15 volt levels are part of the Power Delivery 3.0 standard power range spec from before Type-C hardware was introduced. Any voltages above 5 generally is available to USB-C power delivery or PD mode. That spec allows up to 48 volts at 5 amps for a whopping 240 watts delivered through a USB-C cable, which is kind of remarkable. And it requires the two devices to be able to negotiate that wattage and direction of current. So it does require some intelligence and some embedded circuitry, either in both of the devices and often sometimes in the cable itself. So that is actually how one phone can charge another, that power delivery mode. Or your phone can sometimes charge a power bank for someone else, that sort of thing. And if you think all of that is confusing, you're right. This QR code will take you to the link, or will take you to the URL of the USB article on Wikipedia, which lists all the various generations of USB hardware, their specs, and various current limits. It's an entertaining afternoon's reading, let me tell you. Apple made or makes similar white round rectangle shaped adapters in 29, 30, 35, 61, 75 watt flavors and many more in various markets. And you'd be hard pressed to identify which one is which, even with 20/20 vision, which I have until I started doing this job, and now I require reading glasses. And still, I can't differentiate them unless I'm holding them inches from my face, inches from my face, even with the reading glasses. And that's just 2 of the various USB-C adapters that I have in that white round Rex with debossed Apple logos format, hanging out around my house from all the generations of Apple devices that I've purchased. I could probably throw one and hit another 2 while I'm at it. Or check between the couch cushions for a lost iPad adapter or something. And the reality is, any of those, even the lowest end 30 watt, 29 watt USB-C adapter, AC adapter, will charge, albeit slowly, pretty much any USB-C device, because they are all compatible with at least the slowest, least common denominator, 5 volts, 500 milliamps, because that's the very base minimum spec that you can have and still be compatible with USB. It's not going to charge your 16-inch M4 Max Pro laptop at least not while it's actually running. But if you turn the computer off, so it's not drawing any power, not using anything from the battery, plug it into that underpowered or underspec'd adapter, it will trickle charge that battery at least enough to get it to where it'll boot again, and then drain the battery really quick once the CPU cores start firing off. But it'll be enough to get it turn on and prove that the battery is not completely dead. So if it's USB-C in general, it will work with a USB-C device, even if it is super, super slow. And if you're looking at a laptop or a phone or something and it is just not charging, it's probably because it's using battery power faster than the adapter can power it. And if you're desperate, turn that device off and plug it in, let it charge. Maybe overnight or for a really long time. But the Apple white adapter conundrum, what does this do? What does it charge? That's why one of the tools that I carry with me to solve this particular problem is also one of the cheapest, and that is Black Sharpie. So can you tell which adapter is which now? Or now, can you? So I have a 16-inch M1 Pro from 2021, and I need to know, will it charge? Yes, absolutely. But it will be slower to charge, as I said, on the 96 or the 75 watt than it will be on the 140 watt that came with it. And if I'm actively using it, CPU and GPU cores firing off like mad, it'll be draining the battery faster than the charger can top it off. And by the way, Sharpies also come in silver metallic, so you can use them on the anonymous black power bricks that you have in your electronics bin as well. And I know that label makers exist, and there'll probably be a few people that cringe when they see my handwriting, but Sharpies are cheap. And we were talking about tools, right? So this is that USB multimeter's big brother, the plug-in power meter. You also don't need one of these, but Amazon or your local hardware store will have a variety of similar items to choose from should you decide that you do. There's even Wi-Fi connected versions with a web app that you can use to track and analyze your usage over time and track every dime that you spend keeping the lights on, if you're into that sort of thing. And the server room at your office probably has a UPS unit or some rack power supply with something kind of like this built in to track how much power that installation is using. Standalone ones like this, though, are handy to have to be able to move from place to place, plug in, say, where your home AV setup is to see how much your power bill will be if you were to, say, stream movies all day, or if you left your Mac Pro and 4K displays on all the time, watching screensavers, keeping your guinea pigs entertained or whatever. That kind of meter is also going to be handy to have to see how much capacity you would need if you were to buy a new UPS uninterruptible power supply for that supposed AV setup and all of your Mac Pro 4K screensaver powerhouse. So, a little bit more math. I can tell you that 2023 Mac Pro, that's 330 watts when it's firing on all cylinders, assuming 120 volts US mains power supply, plugged into the APC blah blah 1500, which is rated at 1500 VA, which is the industry unit volt amperes, which is not to be confused with watts, and we know watts are volts times amps, and that'll run that Mac Pro for, what was I asking? APC and other UPS makers, but especially APC, like to make their battery capacity calculations purposely vague. And their reasoning for that is that you're really not supposed to use a UPS battery to run your devices every day, or consider the battery like a primary power supply, as if you were, buying a pack of fresh AA's to put into your TV remote when it runs out of juice. The UPS battery is supposed to get you over a power surge or a quick outage, or give you time to safely shut down in event of a longer outage. And all of the manufacturers will pretty much agree on that. All that being said, in the case of the Backup on Ups 1500 or whatever this is, the capacity of 1500 watts, asterisk VA, volt amperes, is what the unit can be expected to drive as its maximum load. So that's how much work it can be doing at any given moment and presumably still function as designed. Don't exceed that, and the device itself won't be working so hard that it can't keep the battery charged, for instance. Their documentation makes pains to tell you the measurement is in volt amperes, as I said, and not watts, and point out the difference between actual measured current and rated current, the difference being hand wavy, go ask your mother, and don't interrupt me when I'm on the phone, okay? Where was I? The rule of thumb seems to be generally that the battery will keep supplying that maximum current for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes in an outage. So by that math, the 1500 unit would be expected to keep a 330 watt Mac Pro ticking over for about 40 to 45 minutes. More if it's set to sleep when it detects it's on battery, less if you keep editing 4K video on those XD displays while the storm is raging around you. And you can find the watts rating for any device generally, or estimate it based on watts equals amps times volts, and add them all together. So all the devices plugged into that one UPS, add up all the watts, or you could use a meter and record the actual usage for some given amount of time and buy based on that. But don't think of it as buying an hour of battery backup, because that math will drive you mad and eventually bankrupt. The real value of a UPS, and especially a good one, is in it quietly, or hopefully quietly, sitting in between all of your expensive and sensitive electronics and the vast unknown of the power infrastructure that you're plugged into, providing alternating current to your home and business. So having that big battery in line with the AC power coming in from your wall means that the little jitters and spikes of the never exactly an ideal sine wave voltage get first converted to DC, which tops up the battery, and then back to AC for your devices. That all ends up getting converted back into DC again anyway, but let's ignore that for now. All those smaller AC converters are going to be much happier and more efficient when they get cleaner, closer to ideal sine wave power that doesn't drift out of spec whenever your neighbor's air conditioner kicks in or your dryer finishes its run. This power conditioning, it may be called other things in different markets, but it's a feature of the more prosumer or enterprise level UPS. And it's more than your average surge protector or surge suppressor can do. Those aren't much more than over-engineered fuses with some inline capacitors to smooth the output, and they do have value, but don't think of them as a replacement for actual power conditioning if you are spending a lot of money and want your electronics to, say, survive in an unkind environment. The real power conditioning can be achieved a few ways, and marketing on more expensive makes and models of a UPS will focus on that over their actual battery capacity. So consumers want to know they'll still be able to check on the sports ball scores or charge the kids' iPads in a power outage. But businesses who spend a lot of money to make sure their servers are running efficiently want to know that they're not wasting heat and cycles writing out the million little dips and spikes of suboptimal power transmission. So on the higher end models, you'll see them touting true sine wave output. And that language includes models that are marketed to gamers because, of course, next to audiophiles, gamers spend the most money on dubious hardware. The white papers and spec sheets will have oscilloscope traces and all kinds of things just for the extra eye candy. And then there are consumer or value models, which, let's face it, they're still going to keep you from losing your work if the power blinks out, and that's nothing to sneeze at. This is what you might call square wave or sine wave approximation, or not really a sine wave at all, but mathematically similar enough that you can't sue us. And besides, it keeps your lights on when the lightning strikes, doesn't it? The people at hardwareinsights.com, with much more time and money than me, have actually connected dozens of different UPS models up to oscilloscopes and captured the output in all of their squiggly yellow glory. So you can see here the difference between a consumer on the left and a professional model on the right in terms of the AC voltage output. Obviously, devices plugged into the consumer model will still work just fine, but if the mathematical purity of your alternating current is the kind of detail that you're worried about, and it keeps you up at night thinking of the millions of dollars that your fleet of servers are wasting away suffering the jagged sawtooth of suboptimal power conditioning, by all means, spend your money, but spend your money wisely. Thank you for watching. I hope that this has been informative and answered some of your questions about all the things what turns on your Mac and makes it go beep. I have been Charles Mangan, and you can find me on the MacAdmins Slack as Option 8. If you have any feedback or questions, please do relate them to me there at the MacAdmins Slack.